Okay, so I'll go to the last segment, and I'm going to quote a few lines from the NCF 2005, and Chapter 4 reiterates its stand on inclusion. And to quote the NCF, children cannot wake up one fine morning when they are 18 and know how to participate in, preserve, and enhance a democracy. We need to equip our children with the knowledge and skills for participative citizenship. Akanksha, if I may draw you in this, is there a call for social re-engineering in education? What could different stakeholders do differently, and how? How could they handle or adapt to the socio-psychological challenges of inclusion? Is there a case for advocacy? Is there a need for change in attitudes, values, and behaviors to drive effective change or action in this space?
Thank you very much. So, being among the youngest participants here, I just again want to issue a disclaimer that I don't have decades of experience behind me. But whatever I will be speaking is from my experience of having worked very closely with children, and I also work with teachers, using drama and different media for learning, and having gone to a few international conferences, learning from other youngsters who are working on education in other countries. So I want to take the definition of inclusion the way I understand it, before I start talking about what changes are needed. So traditionally we use the word inclusion to indicate bringing children who have different abilities or rather disabilities or challenges into the fold of education. But I would say inclusion is simply answering the question, is there space for me as a learner in this system? Now when I say is there space for me, it's towards a certain end objective. So I would say the end objective would be, is there space for me to reach my potential? Now this space can actually be blocked by multiple things, right? So if I were to use a bit of my MBA brain and put some structure to abstraction, these barriers, if I start from the most external barrier, or what's on the outside, is the physical or the infrastructure. If there is no school, what do I attend? I'm excluded out of education completely. The next level of barriers, I would say, and I'm going to be simplifying things because in the interest of time, but the next level of barriers would be pedagogical, right? Is the instruction in a language which I understand? Am I being taught English but I don't hear it at home? Do I still understand what I'm being instructed for? If I am someone who learns visually but I'm being taught verbally, am I still receiving the instruction the same way, and so on, right? So that, yeah, that sort of captures it. Going one step inside, demographic differences, which could be anything from your caste, your religion, your income level, even gender, pose the next set of barriers, right? So, and this is not just true of rural areas. Issues of inclusion happen in the most elite of schools. And I'll come to that example shortly, but by demographic barriers, let me give you an example from a drama class. So there was one girl in class 6 who was late for the English class. So there's a batch of students who was undergoing a Rotary program. So they were receiving drama and English and computer education. She was late for class. So she was scolded by the teacher, who was a really nice lady who specially came to take those classes. And she scolded the child and said, you know, next time you come this late, I'm either getting you out of this program or I'm calling your parents. And she scolded her really badly because it was the third or fourth time that she was late. So after the class got over and after I was done with the drama class and I was walking out, and the girl was walking next to me and she said, in Hindi, but she said, you know why I was late today? I said, no, tell me. She went on to tell me her whole schedule, and it turned out that her mother had gone out of town and her grandmother was ill, so she woke up at 5 a.m. to fill water, work, and her father said, you know, just sleep for an hour so that you're fresh for school. And in that process, she missed that first class. And the other girl who was late because she was coming from half an hour away. She missed her usual bus. Now, my question is, did that teacher, while scolding her, pause to think, this student is not just one of the other students, she is also a girl, and therefore has situations that could differ from other students, which could come in the way of her learning or simply being present in the class, right? So demographic barriers are present everywhere on all of these dimensions. It's not just, I mean, we read a lot about how children from Dalit families are discriminated against, but that issue, although to a much lesser intensity, does exist even in our schools, even in our urban schools. And another example, since I was talking of a high-income school, I had a chance to work with one really elite school in Bombay. One day I just went to drink water from one of those cooler taps. And while I was filling my bottle, so now this particular school has an international school and it has an ICSE school in the same premise. So I was filling water from that tap and one of the workers said, Madam, yahan se mat bhariye, wahan se bhariye. Don't take this water, take that water. I said, why? This looks like, isn't this filtered? He said, yeah, it's filtered, but that is better. I said, drinking water is drinking water. Why can't I fill it from here? And then it turned out that this particular tap was for the ICSE school children, and that cooler was for the international school children with whom I was working. And that was a shock of my life. You cannot discriminate on water. Does that child not need pure water? I mean, that made me realize that this problem of inclusion or of making education all embracing is not just with the lower income or with rural schools, it's everywhere. And that brings me to the innermost circle. So I'm coming from a very, very strong belief that only infrastructure is not going to succeed in inclusion unless we change the social structures. And behavioral, attitudinal, what is perhaps the most difficult to change and challenge, to my mind poses the last and the most difficult barrier. If I as a teacher am treating two children differently for any reason, any of these reasons, I am blocking something in the learning of that child. So the question is, how do I embrace inclusion inside my head? And that this change brings me to each one of us as individuals. Now if I'm a parent, then I need to question myself, am I okay with my child mingling with the 25% that's going to come into this school and be okay with them playing together? I asked this question to someone who's 22 years old, and she thought about it, and she's like, maybe not. I'd be a little uncomfortable. So I said, exactly, probe that. And what makes you uncomfortable is where our answers lie. What about that mingling makes you uncomfortable, right? So 3 things that I thought need to happen at an individual, at a behavioral level. The strongest one is empathy. Now empathy, we've sort of, okay, let me go through this slide first. So this is a simulation I ran in Islamabad. I was a part of a youth conference there and took a workshop on education. It was very interesting to have this discussion. At the end of the simulation, so the participants were divided into policymakers, school board, teachers, and students. And they had to role play, right? And they were given a situation. And I had modeled that on the introduction of life skills education in CBSE. But didn't tell them that, obviously. It was very interesting to note how the language and the intent from the policymakers to what finally got communicated to the students changed without them even having intended that, or without my introducing any additional constraints, which I did in the simulation. But it was a classic example of that going wrong by the time it filters down. The point of this diagram is to understand where is the problem really lying. If I fixed all of these, right, if I'm making a really brilliant policy, inclusive policy, if I have implementation agencies delivering it, all of that, perhaps the box, the universal set, which is the cultural context, could be the thing that is stopping my policy from really working. So I need to fix the right tap. It's leaking, sure, but am I working on the wrong one? And to my mind, the cultural context today is the biggest challenge to inclusion. Because I might put schools there, but is the parent sending the child? And if the parent is sending the child, is the teacher treating the child the way the child should be treated, right? So, sorry, what was the point I was making before this? I sort of lost track. 3 things, absolutely. 3 things. So, when it comes to empathy, I read this interesting statement which said, ironically, empathy is not about treating everyone the same. Inclusion, sorry, is not about treating everyone the same. It's about treating everyone differently, right? So empathy means I don't treat you the way I think you should be treated, and with my frame of reference, with my priorities. But when I put myself in your shoes, I need to evaluate your priorities, your life values, and why something is important for you, right? Which I think we're not doing at present. And in my presentation, I had some really concrete ideas. I think empathy should be institutionalized. Now, you cannot teach empathy, but you can create the right conditions to allow for empathy. And personally, I think we can learn from other industries as well. So one example that strikes me is of Hindustan Unilever, because I've worked there. Managers beyond a certain level of seniority compulsorily have to spend a certain number of hours with consumers without revealing that they are managers. You have to be on the ground and see what is happening with your product on the ground, compulsorily as a part of your job, right? So if I'm a policy maker, I really need to be in the classroom, in my opinion, experience the life of a student. Reading on paper that there are no toilets in that particular school is very different from me making you sit for 2 hours, not letting you go to the washroom when you really want to. And once I have done that, for 2 hours, I have held that, I will never think about toilets the same way again. And when I'm making the policy then, it'll be very different. You know, so I really think policymakers need to have feet on the street. There are youngsters who can help them do that. There are people, I know 20 people, I know 20 of my friends who are waiting to just work in education, just waiting to get a chance, who can actually go out there and get a feel of what is happening, you know. So, and these kind of ideas exist for all levels. You can really institutionalize empathy, but you really need to know what's happening at the receiving end. And the reverse holds true. I think kids need to learn to empathize with teachers. They're not really having a great time with all the kind of expectations. So, well, paucity of time, so I'm just going to cut this short.
Yeah,
but messages about empathy, the other two being respect and dignity. If I'm creating something for those who are underserved communities, if I'm talking down to them, I'm not really being inclusive. If I'm coming, I've seen so many school students say, you know, I'm doing a social service project.
Yeah.
I'm going to go teach in that BMC school. I'm helping them.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I disagree. You're increasing the divide. You're becoming suddenly higher in status and treating them lower in status. So this NGO called Prava, many of you might have heard of them, take rural exposure camps, fun camps. Really interesting, and I went on one of those camps, stayed for 4 days in a village. Really interesting thing about those camps is students are not told that we are going to go and help the village. They are told we are going there to learn from the village, right? And then the perspective completely changes, because then they are actually going as learners. So that's the other way of bringing empathy in. So
Thank you.
I'll just